Northern Ohio.
The flag behind the astronauts is a prototype of the flag which would be used on the surface. Ready, Bill?
Here it goes.
We're ready to begin. We'll start with a statement by the astronauts and go directly to question and answers.
I can't.
Bill, you may have to tell them. Yeah, they can't hear me in there. You do. Apparently they can't hear.
Well, we're here today to talk a little bit about forthcoming flight Apollo 11. Hopefully the culmination of the Apollo national objective. And we are here being able to talk about this attempt because of the success of 4 previous Apollo manned flights and a number of unmanned flights. Each of those flights contributed in a great way to this flight. Each and every flight took a large number of new objectives and large hurdles and left us with just a very few additions, the final descent, lunar surface work, and ascent to be completed. We're very grateful to those large effort of people here at MSC and across the nation who made those first flights possible, successful, and made it possible for us to sit here today and discuss Apollo 11 with you. I'll ask Mike first to talk about the differences you might see in the command module activities on this flight.
From the command module viewpoint, I hope there'll be very little different on this flight than from its predecessors. Dave Scott and John Young have run through approximately the same sequence of events which will take place for me on Apollo 11, with the exception that the solo period will be somewhat extended on 11. I will be in the thing by myself for slightly over 1 day, and that will include a sleep period. So in some respects, that particular portion of the Apollo 11 flight plan more closely resembles, for example, Gordon Cooper's Mercury flight, where he was up by himself for 30-some hours. The rendezvous has the capability of being somewhat different in that the starting point with the LEM on the surface is a far cry from the preceding rendezvous, where the relative position of the LEM and the command module were very precisely known, having started out from the same little point in the sky together. Whereas in this case, the command module obviously is whizzing around the moon while the LEM is stationary on the surface, and this offers a possibility of rendezvous sequences which could differ significantly from normal. So I think those are probably the 2 major areas in which this flight is somewhat different, again, strictly from the command module viewpoint. Another interesting point to note is that although I'm called the center seat man, in fact I don't ride in the center seat. I ride in either the right-hand seat for launch or the left-hand seat for the burns, entry, and the other major flight plan events. Buzz?
We do have a few new items on the LEM side of the house on this particular mission. We'll be picking up where the Apollo 10 flight left off when they did their phasing maneuver. And at this point, after departing the command module, coming down in the descent orbit, we'll be igniting the descent engine for the first time under a long burn condition when it is not docked with the command module. And executing this burn under control of the computer, being directed toward the various targets that are fed into the computer, will be new on this flight. Also, we'll be making use of the landing radar and its inputs into the computer, inputs in terms of altitude and velocity updates, which will bring us down in the prescribed conditions as we approach the surface of the moon. Of course, the actual control of the touchdown itself will be a rather new item in that it will be testing this man-machine interface to a very sophisticated degree. The touchdown itself will be the ultimate test on the landing gear and the various systems that are in the spacecraft. The environment of 16G will be seen for the first time by crews and spacecraft. We'll also be exposed to thermal conditions that have not been experienced before. The two-man EVA is something that is a first in our program. Sleeping in the LEM on the lunar surface, which we hope to be able to do, will be another new item in this flight. Making star sightings with the alignment telescope to position or correctly determine the attitude of the inertial measurement unit in the LEM vehicle will again be done for the first time. This is a new technique that's used on the lunar surface. And then, of course, the powered ascent with the over 7-minute burn on the ascent engine. These things are the new items that we'll be seeing on Apollo 11. They will bring us back up to that point in the Apollo 10 flight where they had their insertion maneuver. From that point on, we hope that the rendezvous will go as smoothly as it did on that flight. In preparing, of course, for all of these conditions and various contingencies that can develop, we have faced a much wider variety of trajectory conditions that could result, as Mike has mentioned, and lead to a wide variety of conditions of maneuvering spacecraft to bring them back together again. It's in these areas that I've been talking about that Neil and I have been concentrating most of our efforts, since these are the new items on our flight. The other portions of the flight plan have been pretty well worked out by the previous flights, and of course without those procedures having been worked out as well as they have, of course we would not be in a position to fly this mission.
I guess that's all, Brian.
We're ready for questions now. I'll ask you each to wait for the microphone and remind you that those who have those organizations with individual interviews after the press conference, please don't ask questions here. We have one here.
No risk for human life and less costly, of course. Now, what particular gain do you see that you as human beings go there to the moon yourselves and for your country and for mankind as a whole? And do you think that eventually the moon will become part of the civilized world, just as the Antarctic is now, which was also once a remote and inaccessible place.
I missed the first part of your question due to the inaccurate sound system, but I think I understand the gist of the question. And first, let me repeat something that you've all heard before, but probably addresses itself to your question. That is, the objective of this flight is precisely to take man to the moon, make a landing there, and return. That is the objective. There are a number of peripheral secondary objectives, including some of those you mentioned early in your question, that we hope very highly to achieve in great depth. But the primary objective is the ability to demonstrate that mankind in fact can do this kind of a job. How we'll use that information in the centuries to come, only history will tell. I hope that we're wise enough to use the information that we get on these early flights to the maximum advantage possible, and I would think that in the light of our experience over the past decade, that we can indeed hope for that kind of a result.
Jean-Pierre Chapelle, French TV News. What will be, according to you, the most dangerous phase of that fly of Apollo 11?
I think, was the question the most dangerous phase? Well, as in any flight, the phases that give one most concern are always those which have not been done previously, things that are new. And I would hope that in our initial statement we gave you an idea, at least, of what the new things on this flight are. Now, there are other things that we always concern ourselves about greatly, and that is those situations where we have no alternative method to do the job. We have only one. You, when you ride in an airliner across the Atlantic, depended on the wing of the airplane to stay on the fuselage. Without it, you could not make the trip safely. There would be no recourse. Now, we have, on recent flights, have had some of those kinds of situations. In our lunar flights, the rocket engine for the service module must operate for us to return from the moon. There are no alternatives. Similarly, in this flight, we have several situations like that. We have the ascent engine must operate to accelerate us from the lunar surface into lunar orbit, and the service module engine, of course, must operate again to return us to Earth. And as we go farther and farther into space flight, of course, there'll be more and more of these single point systems that must operate. We have very high confidence level in those systems, incidentally, or we would certainly object to starting.
One on the far side.
Mr. Armstrong, I wonder if you and Colonel Aldrin could tell us how much walking you're going to do while you're on the moon, how far away from the LEM you plan to walk, and what sort of gait you think you'll be using. We were told the moon looks like pretty good ankle-breaking territory, and we wondered, for instance, how you might avoid turning an ankle, falling down, or slipping, things of that nature.
Well, Buzz will be doing a good bit of the mobility studies early in our lunar surface activity. I'll let him take a crack at that question.
Well, first off, most of the planned activities that we have do not require us to move more than 50 to 70 feet away from the lunar module. Now, one of the early activities that I'll be engaged in after descending the ladder is, in addition to a rather preliminary evaluation of just how well a man can handle himself in the spacesuit on the surface, one of these things will be called EVA evaluation. Now, as part of this, I'll be determining what is the best pace for moving about, and there have been several different techniques employed in the partial zero gravity trainer, the POGO machine, and it looks like you can walk conventionally 1 foot after another. It also looks as though you can do a 2-footed hop, kangaroo style. Now, we don't really think that this will be the best means, but it does look as though this is possible. As the G-force decreases, I think we have a greater freedom to be able to come up with body movements that are a little bit different than what we're used to in 1G. Now, I think one of the things that we have to be careful of is the balance situation in moving about on the surface. We always have to be able to put a foot underneath where you happen to be, and of course the time period from when your foot leaves the surface till when it comes back down again is going to be longer than it is in a pace, walking pace, or a trotting pace sort of on the earth. And of course this gives the rotational disturbances more time to have an effect. In doing some of the training in the zero-G airplane, which has been flying at 1/6G for this phase of it, it looks as though a fairly rapid pace, I'd hesitate to call it a run, is quite easy to perform. And it looks like we shouldn't have too much difficulty in moving at something like 6, 8, 10 miles an hour. But this is one of the tasks that we'll be attempting to evaluate very early in the EVA.
Have one down here in the corner.
For Neil Armstrong, by the nature of your assignment, if you carry it out successfully, you're destined to become a historical personage of some consequence. And I'm wondering if in that light you've decided upon something suitably historical and memorable to say when you perform this symbolic act of stepping down on the moon for the first time.
No, I haven't.
I hope he doesn't say, oh, I slipped. One back here.
Mark Bloom, New York Daily News. I have a question for Neil Armstrong, if I may. Being the first man to step on the moon, the prospect is possibly that you'll be such a celebrated personality for the rest of your life that you'll never really have again what you might call a personal life. Do you have any thoughts on this prospect?
Well, I suppose if there's any recognizable disadvantage to being in the position I'm in, that's it. I think that's a fair trade.
Have one over here.
I'd like to ask two questions. One, the command module and the lunar module are going to be named or by what you've been using in the simulation?
I think you're referring to the call signs of the spacecraft when they're separated, so
That's
that we
correct.
don't confuse
Yes.
the spacecraft on radio transmissions. Yes, we do intend to use call signs other than those that you may have observed in simulation. Call sign of the lunar module will be Eagle. Call sign of the command module will be Columbia. Columbia. Now, those names, both names, were suggested by a number of people. Very many, large number of other names were also submitted for our consideration, many of which were quite good. We selected these two as being representative of the flight, the nation's hope. Columbia is the national symbol. Columbia stands on top of our Capitol, and as you all know, it was the name of Jules Verne's spacecraft that went to the moon 100 years ago.
Let's catch some of these right in here.
Name is Tanberg. In case you find out you have to cut short your EVA, what will be the priority of the different tasks you plan to perform on the surface? And second, what kind of surface temperatures do you expect?
I'll take a crack at the first one. Our order of priorities was carefully integrated into the flight plan so that the most important things came early in the EVA, and within operational limitations, the priorities reflect the order of things as they're done on the lunar surface, which means that should we have to cut that time short, the most important things would have been completed. Want to take a crack at temperatures, Bud?
No. What would you guess?
Reg Turner, BBC. A question for Neil Armstrong. It was reported by a former NASA official recently, who isn't sitting 100 miles away from me, that you, Mr. Armstrong, exercised your commander's prerogative to step first on the moon instead of Buzz Aldrin. Could you please tell us what the facts are about this? And on a lighter note, could you tell us whether when you step on the moon you'll have had a shave?
First, I've read one article to which you alluded, and it didn't state specifically that the gentleman had said that I had done that. It said that I may have or could have or something to that effect. Facts are that my recommendation was never asked nor given. We do hope to carry Razor aboard, and whether or not we use it is a matter of pilot option at the time, and if we feel so inclined, I would hope that that would be done.